The shuttle pierced the black expanse, its surface shimmering faintly against the cosmic backdrop. Through the viewport, the barren silhouette of Kepler 296 loomed, a dead world orbiting the enigmatic white dwarf Alkiel 32. Even through the vacuum of space, the star seemed alive, pulsating with an unnatural rhythm. Dr. Ilara Venn sat rigid in her seat, her eyes glued to the instruments that were recording Alciel 32's energy bursts. Each flare appeared calculated, deliberate, a pattern that defied the chaos of astrophysics. This was no ordinary star, and it was no ordinary mission. The crew had prepared for months. Kepler 296f was a scientific anomaly, devoid of life or atmosphere, yet holding the gravitational scars of Alkiel 32's impossible energy fields. The orbital scans had shown something even stranger, a structure buried beneath the surface. It wasn't a natural formation. Its geometry was too deliberate, too precise. Ilara's theories had earned her the mission, but she wasn't the only one intrigued. The shadow of AstroSync Corporation loomed over them, their funding contingent on the promise of discovery. Promises Ilara wasn't entirely sure she could fulfill. "We're approaching the surface," Captain Kepler's voice cut through the tense silence. His voice was steady, a practiced calm forged from years of deep space travel. "Final checks." Lyra Henshaw, the engineer, muttered something under her breath as she double-checked the shuttle's systems. Despite her sharp intellect, Lyra was deeply superstitious, a trait that grated on Ilara's scientific sensibilities. Eliant Perez, the geologist, was unusually quiet, his eyes locked on the desolate world below. Only Jonas Korin seemed excited, his fingers drumming against the console as though itching to leap into the unknown. The shuttle touched down with a jarring thud, the barren landscape stretching endlessly in every direction. Outside, the surface was a lifeless expanse of dark, cracked rock, its texture resembling a long-dried scab. The faint glow of Alciel 32 bathed the ground in an eerie bluish-white light, casting jagged shadows that seemed to stretch and writhe with every pulse of the star. The structure wasn't visible from the surface, but the scanners led them straight to it. Beneath layers of brittle stone, they uncovered it, a vast obsidian formation, smooth and cold to the touch. It rose like a tooth from the ground, its surface veined with faintly glowing lines that seemed to pulse in time with Alciel 32's bursts. It wasn't just alien, it was alive. This isn't possible," Lyra whispered as she traced a gloved hand along the structure's edge. The material was like nothing they'd ever seen, neither metal nor stone. It seemed to shiver beneath her touch. Ilara crouched beside her, running a handheld scanner over the surface. The readings were nonsensical, a mix of organic and inorganic compounds, their origins defying explanation. Jonas crouched nearby, staring intently at the glowing veins. "It's beautiful," he murmured, a strange glint in his eye. "A perfect fusion of biology and technology." "It's a containment system," Ilara said, her voice betraying a flicker of unease. "These patterns, they're synchronized with the star. Whatever this is, it's connected to Alciel 32. Captain Kepler's voice crackled through their comms. "Let's not speculate until we know more. Korin, step back. Perez, mark this location for further analysis. Henshaw, start setting up the equipment." The team moved like clockwork, their training suppressing the unease that crept into their movements. Still, the murmurs started almost immediately. Faint whispers crackled through their headsets, rising and falling with the pulses of Alciel 32. At first, they dismissed it as interference, but the whispers grew more distinct, threading together into disjointed phrases that made no sense. Words that didn't belong. It was Perez who first noticed the filaments. They snaked out from beneath the obsidian structure, thin and translucent, like veins stretching toward the team's equipment. When Elara examined them, she found the filaments warm to the touch, their texture disturbingly fleshy. "Organic," she muttered, her voice tight. "Definitely organic." "We've got movement," Lyra's voice cut through the air like a knife. The filaments were retracting, slithering back into the structure as if in response to the team's presence. The whispers in their calms surged, louder now, and accompanied by a faint vibration that seemed to hum through the ground itself. "Everyone back to the shuttle," Captain Kepler ordered. His usual composure was strained, his hand hovering near his holstered weapon. Now, as they retreated, the structure seemed to pulse brighter, its veins glowing with an intensity that made the air feel heavier. Back aboard the shuttle, Elara pored over the data they'd gathered, her mind racing. The structure wasn't just alive, it was awake. That night, while the rest of the team slept fitfully in their bunks, Elara stared out at Alciel 32 from the shuttle's viewport. The star's pulsations were no longer random to her. They were deliberate, a pattern, a signal, and whatever was beneath the surface of Kepler 296F, it wasn't waiting for them to discover it. It was calling them. The portal rippled as though alive, its surface shimmering with an iridescent, liquid sheen. For a moment, the team hesitated, staring into the unknown. The energy readings were spiking, the tethered lines vibrating in time with Alciel 32's now rhythmic pulses. Dr. Elara Venn tightened the straps on her suit and adjusted her helmet. "This is it," she said, her voice steady but tinged with awe. "We go in, gather data, and get out. Stay tethered, and if anything feels wrong, we retreat immediately." Captain Kepler nodded, his jaw clenched. One by one, they stepped forward. The moment Elara's body passed through the portal, the world shifted around her. There was no sensation of movement, no falling or rushing, but everything she knew about reality fractured and reformed. The tether lines jerked violently as the team emerged on the other side. The air was thick and viscous, its color shifting as though it couldn't decide whether to be light or dark. Overhead, the sky bled hues of orange and violet, streaked with pulsating streams of liquid light that stretched and coiled like living arteries. The ground beneath their boots was soft, but not quite soil. It undulated faintly, almost breathing. Strange mists drifted across the landscape, twisting into tendrils before dissipating like they'd never existed. Captain Kepler's voice broke the silence. "Is everyone intact?" A series of shaky affirmations followed. They stood on a vast plain littered with spires of bone-white material that jutted from the ground at unnatural angles. Each spire emitted a low hum, faintly melodic, vibrating deep in their chests. Elara took a step forward, her boots sinking slightly into the surface. It didn't feel like rock or dirt, more like flesh, soft and yielding, yet cool to the touch. "Recording all of this," Elara murmured, her eyes darting across the landscape. Her instruments were nearly useless, their readings fluctuating wildly. The laws of physics, it seemed, had abandoned this place. The first creature appeared almost as if it had always been there. a towering six-legged beast, its translucent skin revealing a network of pulsing veins and glowing organs. It moved with a slow, deliberate grace, its eyeless head swaying as though sniffing the air. Jonas Corrin stepped forward, his voice hushed with reverence. "Incredible," he breathed, lifting his scanner. It's beautiful. Beautiful," Lyra hissed. "It looks like it crawled out of a nightmare." The creature paid them no mind, ambling past on limbs that bent in impossible directions. But as it moved, Ilara noticed the surface beneath it responding. The ground shifted, forming faint impressions where its legs touched, as though the world itself was accommodating its presence. "Let's keep moving," Kepler ordered, his voice firm. "Stick together. No wandering." As they advanced, the terrain grew more chaotic. Gravity fluctuated with each step, pulling them in odd directions. A nearby stream of liquid light twisted into a vertical column, its surface reflecting distorted images of the team as they passed. The images didn't match their movements. They lingered, hesitated, and at times seemed to look back at them with expressions that didn't belong. Perez was the first to stumble. He cried out, his voice sharp and panicked, as his arm brushed against what appeared to be a tree, a black, spindly structure covered in tendrils. The tree quivered in response, its tendrils latching onto his suit. Ilara rushed to him, pulling at the tendrils, but they had already begun to burrow into the fabric. "Cut it off," Perez screamed, his voice rising in pitch as his arm began to change. The skin beneath the suit bubbled and stretched, the bone beneath warping into unnatural angles. Lyra hacked at the tendrils with a utility blade, freeing him, but it was too late. Perez collapsed, convulsing as his body twisted and writhed, becoming something unrecognizable. Ilara watched in horror as his body melted into the ground, merging with it. The surface rippled as though digesting him, leaving only a faint, viscous residue. "Back to the portal," Kepler barked, his hand gripping his weapon. "Now!" But the portal was no longer where they'd left it. The horizon shifted, spires and streams rearranging themselves as though the world were alive and watching. Jonas stood apart from the group, his face alight with fascination rather than fear. The hive loomed ahead, a pulsating monolith that seemed to breathe with the same rhythm as Alciel-32. Its surface was a swirling chaos of organic and metallic textures, alive with the same glowing veins that ran through the alien terrain. The air grew heavier as the team approached, thick with a faintly metallic scent that clung to their throats. Each step closer to the hive sent vibrations through the ground, resonating through their boots and up into their chests, as though the world itself was alive and aware of their presence. Dr. Ilara Ven's stomach churned with unease. She tightened her grip on the scanner in her hands, its readings more erratic than ever. No consistent data, no sense to be made of this place. Her mind, sharp and disciplined by years of scientific rigor, rebelled against the impossibility of it all. Yet here they were, drawn inexorably toward the hive as though it had summoned them. "This is it," she said, her voice thin and dry. "The source. It's all connected to this." Captain Kepler surveyed the area, his weapon raised, his eyes darting between the grotesque tendrils that stretched out from the hive like roots of a malignant tree. Lyra Henshaw, her face pale and drawn, stayed close to the captain, her tool belt jingling faintly with each trembling step. Caleb Saunter lingered at the back of the group, clutching a sample kit as though it might shield him from the growing sense of dread. Jonas Corrin was different. He stood apart, his gaze fixed on the hive with an intensity that set Ilara's teeth on edge. His suit, stained with alien ichor from his earlier samples, gave him the appearance of someone who belonged to this world rather than an intruder. He moved with a strange confidence, his steps fluid, his breathing unnaturally calm. "We're not just observers here," Jonas said, his voice breaking the oppressive silence. "We're participants. Don't you feel it? This place, it knows us. It recognizes us." "Shut up, Corrin," Kepler snapped, his patience fraying. "Focus on the mission. We're here to gather intel, not get lost in whatever delusions this place is feeding you." Jonas turned, his expression serene but unsettling. "It's not delusion, Captain. It's enlightenment." Ilara clenched her fists. "Enlightenment? Perez died, Jonas. He was consumed by this place. Is that what you call enlightenment?" Jonas shrugged, his calm demeanor infuriating. "Perez was an accident, a misstep. He wasn't ready. But we can be. This hive, this world, it's not hostile, it's transformative." Before Ilara could respond, Jonas stepped forward, placing his hand on the hive's surface. The others froze, their breaths caught in their throats. The hive reacted instantly, its surface rippling and folding inward, pulling Jonas's hand deeper. He didn't resist. Instead, he smiled, a rapturous expression spreading across his face as the veins on the hive began to glow brighter. Kepler raised his weapon. "Jonas, get back, now." Jonas ignored him. The glow from the hive began to spread, washing over Jonas's body. His skin beneath the suit shifted, veins darkening, muscles rippling unnaturally. Ilara took a step back, her mind racing with the implications of what she was seeing. "This is power," Jonas said, his voice layered, as though two people were speaking at once. "This is evolution." The hive released him, and Jonas turned to face the team. His transformation was incomplete but unmistakable. His eyes glowed faintly, and the veins beneath his skin pulsed with the same rhythm as the hive and Alcyl 32. His movements were fluid, yet wrong, his limbs bending in ways that no human body should. "I can feel it now," he said. "This isn't just a world. It's a network, a living organism spanning dimensions. And the portal is the key." "What the hell are you talking about?" Lyra hissed, her voice trembling. "This place is a nightmare. You're turning into one of them." Jonas tilted his head, a faint smile playing on his lips. "And why wouldn't I? Don't you see? This world is offering us freedom from limitation, from weakness. You're clinging to the idea of humanity like it's something precious, but it's nothing. We're nothing." Kepler took a step forward, his weapon aimed at Jonas's chest. "Step away from the hive. Last warning." Jonas laughed, a sound that echoed unnaturally through the air. "You don't understand, do you? You can't stop this. The portal isn't just an entry point, it's a tool, a weapon. If we bring it back, imagine what we could do. Whole worlds reshaped in our image." "That's why you sabotaged the equipment," Ilara said, her voice shaking with anger. "You've been planning this since the beginning." Jonas's smile widened. "You're quicker than I gave you credit for. Yes, I sabotaged the tether system. None of you are going back. But I will, and I'll bring the portal's gift to the rest of humanity." Before Kepler could react, Jonas moved, faster than any human should be able to. He lunged at Kepler, his hands twisted into claw-like appendages. Kepler fired, the shot tearing into Jonas's shoulder, but it didn't stop him. Jonas laughed as his wound closed almost instantly, the flesh knitting together in a grotesque display of alien biology. The team scattered, the terrain shifting beneath their feet as though responding to the chaos. Ilara grabbed Lyra's arm, pulling her toward a cluster of bone-like spires for cover. Behind them, Jonas was relentless, his movements a horrifying blend of predator and puppet, as though the hive itself were guiding him. "We have to get to the portal," Ilara gasped, her mind racing. "If we can reach it, we can shut it down." Lyra nodded, her face pale but determined. Together they sprinted toward the distant shimmer of the portal, the ground shifting and buckling beneath them. Behind them, Kepler and Caleb fought to slow Jonas down, using everything at their disposal. But it was clear that Jonas was no longer human. He was something far worse. The whispers in the air grew louder, the ground trembling as the hive pulsed brighter. The world itself seemed to be coming alive, responding to Jonas's transformation. Ilara's legs burned as she ran, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. The portal was their only hope. If they couldn't escape, humanity would never know the danger that lay hidden beyond the stars, and Jonas would ensure that danger found them first. The portal shimmered ahead, flickering as though it were on the verge of collapse. Its once liquid surface now pulsed erratically, the obsidian veins surrounding it trembling with every surge. Ilara Venn stumbled toward it, her breath ragged, her body battered and slick with the alien ichor that clung to her like a second skin. Behind her, the screams and guttural growls of the hive echoed through the fractured terrain, carried on the vibrating air that seemed to press against her skull. Lyra Henshaw was at her side, limping, her left leg dragging behind her from an earlier fall. Her face was pale, streaked with grime and sweat, but her eyes burned with determination. Captain Kepler followed close behind, cradling his injured arm, his weapon still clutched tightly in his unbroken hand. Of the others, there was no sign. Caleb was lost, swallowed by the hive in a moment of sickening violence. And Jonas had become something else entirely. "Go!" Kepler barked, his voice strained but commanding. "Get through the portal. I'll hold him off." Ilara shook her head violently, tears stinging her eyes. "Number, you won't make it alone. We have to shut it down together." "There's no time to argue," Lyra snapped, her voice cracking with desperation. "If we don't stop this now, it won't matter if we survive. That thing, whatever it is, will find a way through." They reached the base of the portal as the ground beneath them began to shift and ripple like liquid. The hive was reacting to their movements, its tendrils surging through the air like living shadows, trying to block their path. Jonas's laughter echoed from the distance, closer now, his voice distorted, layered with a deep, resonant tone that was no longer human. "You think you can stop me?" Jonas roared, his voice carrying across the alien landscape. His figure emerged from the mists, grotesquely altered. His body was a patchwork of flesh and chitin, his arms elongated into sharp, claw-like limbs. His face was barely recognizable, his glowing eyes fixed on the portal. "You don't understand. This is our destiny, our ascension." Kepler turned, raising his weapon. "Keep moving," he shouted to Ilara and Lyra before firing a burst of energy rounds. The shots struck Jonas, staggering him briefly, but he barely flinched. The alien biology that had overtaken him absorbed the impact, and he lunged forward with terrifying speed. Ilara reached the portal's control interface, a tangled mass of organic and technological components that writhed under her touch. The readings were incomprehensible, but her instincts guided her hands. If she could overload the connection between the portal and Alciel-32, it might collapse the gateway, severing the link between worlds. But the energy it would unleash would almost certainly kill anyone too close. "We can't let him cross," Ilara cried, her fingers flying over the controls. "This star, this whole system, it's not a prison for this world. It's a prison for it." Lyra turned to her, her face a mask of confusion and fear. "What do you mean?" Ilara's voice trembled as she spoke, piecing together the truth that had haunted her since their arrival. The hive, the creatures, the distortions, it's all part of the same entity. It's fragmented, trapped here, but the portal is letting it reassemble itself. Jonas isn't just part of it now. He's its harbinger. As if on cue, Jonas howled, a guttural, primal sound that shook the air. His form twisted further, his body convulsing as the hive surged toward him, feeding him, strengthening him. He leapt toward Kepler, knocking the captain to the ground. Kepler grunted in pain, his weapon knocked from his grasp. "Go," Kepler rasped, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth. "Blow it. Do it now." Ilara hesitated, her hand hovering over the final sequence. She glanced back at Kepler, who was grappling with Jonas, his strength no match for the monster the man had become. Lyra grabbed her shoulder, her voice trembling. "We have to end this." Tears streamed down Ilara's face as she activated the sequence. The portal began to tremble violently, its surface crackling with arcs of energy that spread across the terrain. The veins in the hive pulsed faster, the entire landscape reacting as though in pain. Alciel-32 flared in the sky, its light blinding, its energy output spiking beyond anything they had seen before. Jonas threw Kepler aside, his glowing eyes locking onto the portal. "No!" he screamed, his voice a deep, reverberating roar. "You can't take this from me! I was chosen!" He lunged toward the portal, his claws outstretched, but the energy field exploded outward, stopping him mid-air. His form convulsed, the alien biology that had consumed him disintegrating under the force. He screamed, a sound of pure rage and agony, before collapsing into a heap, his body dissolving into the ground. The portal's energy surged toward critical mass. Ilara turned to Lyra, her voice breaking. "You need to go. Get back to the shuttle." Lyra shook her head violently. "Not without you." "You have to," Ilara shouted, gripping her shoulders. "This won't hold for long. Someone has to make it back. Someone has to warn them." Before Lyra could argue further, Ilara pushed her toward the edge of the portal's radius. Kepler, barely conscious, dragged himself to his feet and limped after her, his gaze meeting Ilara's for a final moment. He gave a faint nod, his expression one of understanding and sorrow. Ilara turned back to the controls, her hands shaking. The final override sequence required manual input. There would be no escape for her. But if it meant stopping the creature and sealing this nightmare world forever, it was worth it. As the portal began to implode, Ilara felt the ground tremble beneath her. The air grew impossibly heavy, pressing against her chest. She glanced up at the sky where Alciel-32 flared one last time, its light consuming the landscape. Her final thought was not of fear, but of hope that her sacrifice would mean the end of this horror. The portal collapsed in a cascade of light and sound, its energy folding inward until nothing remained. The hive fell silent, the terrain going still. In the distance, Lyra and Kepler watched from the shuttle as Alciel-32 dimmed, its pulsations fading until it became just another faint star in the void. Lyra sat in stunned silence as the shuttle ascended, leaving Kepler 296F behind. She stared out the viewport, her hands trembling as dark ichor clung stubbornly to her fingernails. Kepler leaned back, his face pale, his eyes haunted. Neither spoke. As the shuttle entered hyperspace, the final faint echoes of Alciel-32's rhythmic pulses reverberated across the stars, a quiet reminder that the prison held, for now. But Lyra knew the truth, deep in her bones. This wasn't an end, it was a warning.